Hey guys, welcome back to our next chapter of The Sorceress, The Secrets of the Immortal Nicholas Flamel. We are now on chapter 5. What's up? My phone is ringing. Sophie ducked into a doorway, fished in her pocket, and pulled out her cell phone. The battery had died in Hecate's shadow realm, but the Comte de Saint-Germain had found her a charger that worked. Tilting the screen, she peered at the unusual long number. "I don't know who it is," she said, looking from her brother to Nicholas. Josh looked over his sister's shoulder. "I don't recognize the number," he added. "What does it begin with?" Nicholas asked, squinting, trying to focus on the screen. 0033. "That's the country code for France," Flamel said. "Answer, it can only be Francis. Or D, or Machiavelli," Josh said quickly. "Maybe we should..." But before he could finish, Sophie had pressed the answer button. "Hello?" she said cautiously. "It's me." Saint Germain's voice was light and ancientless, and Sophie could tell he was outside by all the noise in the background. "Let me speak to the old man, and don't tell him I said that." Sophie bit back a grin and handed the phone to the alchemist. "You were right. It's Francis. He wants to talk to you." Nicholas pressed the phone to one ear and covered the other with his hand, trying to block out the noise of the traffic. "Hello?" "Where are you?" Saint Germain asked in Latin. Nicholas looked around, trying to orient himself. "On Marylebone Road, just coming up to Regent's Park Tube Station." "Hang on, I've got someone on the other line." Nicholas heard Saint Germain move away from the phone and relay the information in rapid-fire archaic French. "Okay," he said a moment later. "Continue straight down the road and then wait outside St. Marylebone Church. You will be picked up." "How will I know the driver is working for you?" Nicholas asked. "A good point. Do you have any reason to believe this conversation may be monitored?" "Both the Italian and the Englishman certainly have the resources," the alchemist said carefully. "That is true. And there was an unwelcoming committee waiting for us. I would imagine that they reported in before they came after us." "Ah," Saint Germain paused and then said carefully, "I am assuming you took care of the problem discreetly." "Very discreetly. But, said Germain, asked, "although I used none of my aura, a certain amount of power was released. That's sure to attract attention, especially in this city." There was another pause. Then Saint Germain said, "Okay, I've just sent the driver a text. Let me remind you of a party I held in Versailles in February 1758. It was my birthday, and you gave me a volume-bound book from your personal library as a present." Nicholas's lips curled in a smile. "I remember. I still have the book. The driver will tell you the title," he continued, raising his voice over the rattle of hammering background. "What's all the noise?" Flamel asked, slipping back into English. "Workmen. We're trying to shore up the house. Apparently there is the very real danger that it will collapse into the catacombs below and probably take half the street with it." Nicholas lowered his voice. "Old friend, I cannot tell you how sorry I am for the trouble I brought to your home. I will of course pay for the damage." Saint Germain chuckled. "Please do not trouble yourself. It's not costing me anything. I've sold the exclusive rights to the story to a magazine. The fee more than takes care of the repairs, and the press coverage is invaluable. My new album is shooting up the download charts. If that is not a contradiction," he added with a laugh. "Which story?" Nicholas asked, glancing quickly at the twins. "Why, the gas explosion that damaged my house, of course," Saint Germain said lightly. "I must go. I will keep in touch, an old friend." He paused. "Be careful." If there is anything you need, anything, then you know how to get in touch with us. Nicholas hit the off button and handed the phone back to Sophie. Without a word, he said, "We heard." The twins' awakened senses had allowed them to clearly hear both sides of the conversation. "A gas explosion?" Sophie asked. "Well, he could hardly say the damage was caused by some sort of primeval dinosaur, could he?" Josh teased. "Who'd believe him?" Shoving his hands in his pockets, he hurried after Flamel, who was already striding down the street. "Come on, sis." Sophie nodded. Her brother had a point, but she was also beginning to see how the elders had managed to keep their existence a secret for so long. Mankind simply didn't want to believe that there was magic in the world. Not in this age of science and technology. Monsters and magic belong to the primitive, uncivilized past, and yet the last few days she'd seen that every day there was evidence for magic. People reported impossibilities all the time. They saw the strangest things, the most bizarre creatures, and no one believed them. They couldn't all be wrong, lying, confused, or misguided, could they? If the Dark Elders and their servants were in positions of power, then all they would have to do was dismiss the reports, ignore them, or, as had just happened in Paris, ridicule them in the media. Soon, even the people who had made the reports, the very people who had seen something out of the ordinary, would begin to doubt the evidence of their own senses. Just yesterday, the Nidhogg, a creature that supposedly existed only in legend, had rampaged through Paris' narrow streets, leaving a trail of devastation. It had crashed across the Champs-Élysées and ripped apart a section of the famous quayside before plunging into the river. Dozens of people must have seen it, but where were their stories, their statements? The press had reported the event as a gas explosion in the ancient catacombs, and then all the gargoyles and grotesque on Notre Dame had come alive and crawled down the building. Using Josh's aura to enhance her own, Sophie had used fire and air magic to reduce the creatures to little more than shattered stone. And yet, how had it been reported in the press? The effects of acid rain. As they sped through the French countryside on the Eurostar, they read the online coverage on Josh's laptop. Every news organization in the world had some story about the events, but they all told versions of the same lie. It was only on the wilder conspiracy websites and blogs that sightings of Nidhogg had been reported, along with shaky mobile phone footage of the monster. Dozens of postings dismissed the videos and stills as fake, comparing them to images of Sasquatch and the Loch Ness Monster that had been proven false. Only now, of course, Sophie was beginning to suspect that both of those creatures were probably real too. She hurried to catch up with Flamel and her brother. "Stay close, Sophie," Nicholas said. "You have no idea of the danger we're in." "So you keep telling us," she muttered, though right now she couldn't figure out how things could get any worse. "Where are we going?" Josh asked. He was still dizzy after the adrenaline rush, and now he was starting to feel shaky as well. "Just down here," Nicholas said, nodding toward a white stone church on their left. Sophie caught up with her brother and noticed that he was pale, and there was a light sheen of sweat on his forehead. She gripped his arm and squeezed lightly. "How are you doing?" She knew what he was going through. The noise, the smells, the sounds of the city were starting to overwhelm his recently awakened senses. She'd experienced the same shocking sensory overload when Hecate had awakened her, but while the Witch of Endor and Joan had helped her control the wash of emotions and sensations, there was no one to help her brother. "I'm fine," Josh said quickly. "Okay, not so well," he admitted a moment later, seeing the look of disbelief on his sister's face. She'd been through the same transformation. She knew what he was feeling. It's just that everything. He struggled to find the words. It's just too much, Sophie had finished for him. Josh nodded. Too much, he agreed. I can't even taste the car exhaust. Everything adjusts, she promised. And it gets easier. Or maybe you just get used to it. I don't think I could ever get used to this, he said, dipping his head and squinting against the brilliant sunshine breaking through the blue-black clouds. Sunlight sparkling on the wet streets sent painful daggers into his eyes. I need sunglasses. That's a good idea, Sophie trotted ahead a few steps. Nicholas, wait up, she called. But though the alchemist glanced over his shoulder, he did not stop. We cannot delay, he snapped, and continued a brisk pace. Sophie stopped in the middle of the street and pulled her brother to a halt with her. Nicholas had walked half a dozen paces before he realized that the twins were no longer behind him. He stopped and turned, waving them forward. They ignored him, and when he strode back to them, there was something dark and ugly about the set of his face. I've no time for this nonsense. We need sunglasses for Josh, and for me too, Sophie said, and water. We'll get them later. We need them now, she said firmly. Nicholas opened his mouth, spit out a reply, but Josh took a step forward, bringing him close to the alchemist. We need them now. There was something like arrogance in his voice. Standing on parapets in front of the cathedral in Paris, feeling the raw power flowing through his body, watching the animated stone gargoyle shatter to dust, he had realized just how powerful he and his sister were. At this moment, they might need the alchemist, but he needed them also. Nicholas looked into the boy's bright blue eyes, and whatever he saw in them made him nod and turn back to a row of shops. Water and sunglasses, he said. Any particular color sunglasses? He asked sarcastically. Black, the twins answered in unison. Sophie stood with Josh outside the shop. She was exhausted, but she knew Josh was feeling even worse. Now that the rain had blown over, the street was beginning to fill up. People of a dozen different nationalities walked past, chatting in a variety of languages. Sophie suddenly tilted her head to one side, brows creasing in a frown. What's wrong? Josh asked immediately. Nothing's wrong, she said slowly. It's just that... What? I thought I recognized some of the words those people were saying. Her brother turned to follow her gaze. Two women in long, flowing abaya of the Middle Eastern countries, their heads covered and their faces hidden behind burqas, chatted together animatedly. They're sisters. They're going to see a doctor just around the corner in Harley Street, Sophie said in wonder. Josh turned to hear better and pushed his hair back off his ear. Concentrating hard, he managed to isolate the voices of the two women. Sophie, I can't make out a word they are saying. I think they're speaking Arabic. Two smartly dressed businessmen walked past, heading towards Regent's Park tube station. They're both on mobile phones. The one on the left is talking to his wife in Stockholm. Sophie continued, her voice now little more than a whisper. He's sorry he missed his son's birthday party. The one on the right is talking to his head office, also in Sweden. He wants some spreadsheets emailed. Josh turned his head again, ignoring the traffic and the myriad other noises of the city. Suddenly he found that by focusing on the two businessmen, he could pick up individual words. His hearing was so acute that he could even hear the tiny voices on the other end of the cell phone. Neither man was speaking English. How can you understand? He asked. It's the wish of Ender's knowledge, Nicholas said. He had stepped out of the shop in time to hear Josh's question. He pulled two pairs of identical cheap sunglasses from a paper bag and handed them over. No, not designer, I'm afraid. Sophie slipped the dark glasses onto her face. The relief was immediate, and she could see by her brother's expression that he felt the same. Tell me, she said. I thought it was just a lot of ancient stuff she passed on to me. I didn't realize any of it would be useful. Nicholas handed over 2 bottles of water, and the twins fell into step beside him as he hurried down the street toward St. Marylebone Church. The witch passed on all her knowledge to you when she wrapped you in the shroud of air. It was, I'll admit, too much for you to handle, but I'd no idea she was going to do it," he added quickly. Seeing the scowl appear on Josh's face, it was totally unexpected and completely out of character. Generations ago, priestesses would study with the witch all their lives to be rewarded with only the tiniest fragment of her knowledge. "Why did she give it all to me?" Sophie asked, confused. "It's a mystery," he admitted. Spotting a gap in the traffic, the alchemist hurried the twins across Marylebone High Street. They were close enough now to see the elegant facade of the church ahead of them. "I know Joan helped sift through the witch's knowledge for you." Sophie nodded. "In Paris, while she slept, Joan of Arc had taught her techniques for controlling the jumble of arcane and obscure information that washed through her brain. I believe that what is happening now is that the Witch of Endor's memories and knowledge are gradually being absorbed into your own memories. Rather than simply just knowing what the witch knows, you will also know how she knows it. In effect, her memories are becoming yours." Sophie shook her head. "I don't understand." They had finally reached the church. Nicholas climbed 2 steps and looked up and down the road, quickly scanning the passer-by, twisting to look out toward Regent's Park before turning back to the twins. "It's like the difference between watching a game and playing the game. When you met Saint Germain," he added, "you instantly knew what the witch knows about him, right?" Sophie nodded. It had come to her in a flash that the Witch of Endor neither liked nor trusted the Comte de Saint Germain. "Think about Saint Germain now," the alchemist suggested. She looked at her brother, who shrugged, eyes invisible behind his own dark glasses. Sophie turned over her right wrist. On the other side of her arm was a gold circle with a red dot in the center. Saint Germain had painlessly burned the tattoo into the flesh of her wrist when he taught her about magic of fire. Thinking of Saint Germain brought a sudden flood of memories, brilliant, intense physical memories. Sophie closed her eyes, and in an instant she was in another time, another place. London, 1740. She was standing in an enormous ballroom wearing a gown that was so heavy it felt as if it was pressing her into the ground. It was amazingly uncomfortable, biting and pinching, squeezing, constricting, and contracting everywhere. The air in the ballroom stank of candle wax and too many perfumes of overflowing toilets, cooked food, and unwashed bodies. A crowd of people swirled around her, but as she moved forward, they unconsciously moved out of her way, clearing a path to this somberly dressed young man with startling blue eyes. It was Francis, the Comte de Saint Germain. He was speaking in Russian with a nobleman from the court of the infant Emperor Ivan VI. She found she understood what he was saying. The nobleman was hinting that Peter the Great's youngest daughter, Elizabeth, might soon seize power, and that there would be business opportunities for a man of Saint Germain's skills in St. Petersburg. The Count slowly turned to look at her. Taking her hand in his, he bowed over it and said in Italian, "It is an honor to finally meet you, madame." Sophie's eyes blinked open, and she swayed. Josh's arm shot out to catch hold of her. "What happened?" he demanded. "I was there," Sophie whispered. She shook her head quickly. "Here, in London, more than 250 years ago. I saw everything." She reached out to squeeze his arm. "I could feel the clothes I was wearing, smell the stink of the room, and when Saint Germain spoke in Russian, I understood him. And then when he talked to me in Italian, I understood that too. I was there," she repeated, still awed by her new memories. "The Witch of Endor's memories are becoming your memories," Nicholas said. "Her knowledge is becoming yours. Eventually, all that she knows, you will know." Sophie Newman shivered. Then she suddenly thought of something disturbing. "But what happens to me?" she asked. "The witch has thousands of years of memories and experiences. I've only got 15.5 years, and I don't remember all of them. Could her memories crowd mine out?" Nicholas blinked hard, then slowly nodded. I hadn't thought of that, but yes, you're right, they could, he said very quietly. Well, have to ensure that does not happen. Why? The twins asked together. Nicholas came down the steps to stand beside them. Because we are nothing more than the sum of our memories and experiences. If the witch's memories crowd out yours, then you will in fact become the Witch of Endor. Josh was horrified. And what happens to Sophie? If that happens, there will be no more Sophie. There will only be the witch. Then she did it deliberately, Josh said, anger raising his voice enough to attract the attention of a group of tourists photographing the church's clock face. His twin nudged him and he lowered his voice to a hoarse whisper. That's why she gave Sophie all her knowledge. Nicholas started to shake his head, but Josh pressed on. Once her memories take over completely, then she has a newer, younger body rather than her old, blind body. You can't deny it. Nicholas closed his mouth and turned away. I have to think about this, he said. I've never heard of anything like this happening before. But you never heard of the witch giving all her knowledge to one person before, did you? Josh demanded. Sophie caught the alchemist's arm and stepped in front of him. Nicholas, what do we do? She asked. I have no idea, he admitted, with an exhausted sigh, and in that moment he looked ancient, with lines etched deeply onto his forehead and around his eyes, creases alongside his nose, deep grooves between his eyebrows. Then who would know? She snapped, a note of fear in her voice. Pernelli, he said, and then nodded fiercely. My Pernelli will know what to do. We've got to get you back to her. She'll be able to help. In the meantime, you've got to concentrate on being Sophie. You've got to focus on your own identity. How? Think about your past, your parents, your schools, people you've met, friends, enemies, places you've visited. He turned to Josh. You've got to help. Ask your sister questions about the past, about everything you've done together, the places you've been. And Sophie, he added, turning to look at the girl, every time you begin to experience one of the Witch of Endor's memories, deliberately focus on something else, a memory of your own. You have to fight to keep the witch's memories from overwhelming yours until we find a way to control them. Suddenly, a black London cab pulled up to the curb, and the passenger window slid down. Get in, a voice commanded from the shadows. No one moved. We don't have all day. Get in. There was a hint of North Africa in the rich timbre of the voice. We didn't call a cab, Flamel said, desperately glancing up and down the road. St. Germain had said he was sending someone to them. The alchemist had never imagined it was going to be anything as ordinary as a London taxi. Was this a trap? Had Dee caught up with them? He looked over his shoulder at the church. The door was open. They could dart up the steps into the sanctuary of the church, but once inside they would be trapped. This car was specially ordered for you, Mr. Flamel. There was a pause, and the voice added, the author of one of the most boring books I have ever read, the philosophic summary. Boring? Nicholas yanked the door open and pushed the twins into the gloom. It's been acknowledged for centuries as a work of genius. Climbing in, he slammed the door. Francis probably told you to say that. You'd better buckle up, the driver commanded. We've got all sorts of company heading this way. None of it friendly, and all of it unpleasant. Alright, guys. Well, that concludes this chapter for tonight. And we will see you next time. Have a good night, and I hope you enjoyed. Bye.